Hi from downtown Melbourne, Australia. This is the Bonsai Stuff podcast and I'm Scott Martin, as always. This episode of the podcast, the 29th episode for 2023, cracking along. I want to talk about some things that I've learned from repotting this year as it comes to an end. Thank goodness. Starts to wrap up. Just a few things that I've picked up that I want to pass along as well. I want to tell a story about the weakest link and how it can be the downfall of anyone with bonsai. It has to do with watering, so it's an interesting thing. I talk about rechecking and refreshing and renewing your watering system during this part of the year, so it's ready for when we hit the hot season. And lucky I did. So I'll tell you a story about that. And I want to talk about the primary focus for the spring growth, which is about to happen for us in the southern part of Australia. The trees are opening up now, buds are swelling, growth's starting to extend. So it's to cut or not to cut. So we'll talk about that a bit later on in the podcast. Repotting, I love it, and I've got a love-hate relationship with it. No, I don't hate it, but it's just it's exhausting. By the end of it, you become a bit fatigued, a bit tired. Stock starts running out, and you can really start to see the finish line when the trees start waking up and start pushing. So, I wanted to have a bit of a reflection moment, look back on what I've learned from repotting this year. And this one came to me not that long ago when I was repotting a lot of larger trees around at a customer's house, and we were chit-chatting, having a talk, and I was scratching the hell out of this root ball, and there was stones and dirt flying everywhere and straight in my gob. So when I repot, one of the things I learnt was maybe don't talk when you've got the rake in your hand. Maybe wait till you're finished separating that root ball before you start procrastinating and discussing deep and meaningful issues around the world at this time of year. So, so keep your mouth closed when you're raking the roots. That was one of the big ones. The other one, when you think you're finished, you're not. I had a big Japanese black pine, one of my favourite trees, and I've talked about in the podcast before as well. The one that I sort of learned a lot from and did a lot of work with bending and stuff like that, and it's really coming to the fore now, and it's magnificent. And it's been in a pot. The pot meant a lot to me because I sort of carried it back in a backpack from Japan, so I was a bit sentimental, but I knew the pot was getting a bit small for the size of the tree. And based on the nabari, the root spread, sort of going edge to edge, I was really limited with this pot that stopped me from rotating the tree around because it just wouldn't fit. It physically would not fit, which is where I was having problems with getting soil down into the root ball originally and all that sort of stuff. So I looked at this tree and I thought, nah, you were done. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago it was repotted, and I thought, I've got another year in you. I can really, you're still fine. Water's still getting in there. Had to scratch the surface off over autumn to try and lower it down a little bit and make it a bit easier to water. So it was getting to the difficult point, I suppose, with watering, and I knew that summer would be a challenge, but I really wanted to keep the tree in its current state and just try and really get some nice refinement happening with the needles. Anyway, so then I've started looking at the tree and had it positioned from my workshop where I could look out onto the podium where it was sitting, and I'd started to rotate it around a little bit because I thought, the front where I've got it positioned in the pot now, it's really nice, but it's not exactly where I'd finish the tree, where I'd love to see this tree end up. So I'd started viewing it from this new angle, which sort of took the primary branch from coming a little bit too far to the front of the tree and sort of pushed it nicely to the side. I brought a tree that was sort of around the back of the tree beautifully to the opposite side of the tree, and the trunk movement really sort of exaggerated. And if you get a tree that sort of bends and curves or whatever, you can look at it from some angles and it looks really, really like there's a lot of movement, and look at it from other angles and it can look like it's pretty straight. So this wasn't looking straight, but it definitely had a nicer view of some movement on the trunk by just rotating it slightly around. And, as I thought I'd finished all of my own personal repotting, and I was getting to the end of wrapping up repotting for other people, and I'd looked at this tree and looked at this tree and looked at this tree, and then one day I went, "You're not done. You just can't leave it. Let's step one. I'll go through go through my shed and have a look and see if I've got a pot that would suit it." So I picked out 3 possible candidates. And one of them, as soon as I touched it, I went, "Yeah, that's it. That's the one." It's a really nice quality pot. It's got some really nice age to it. It's got a lovely colour, a lovely texture, and I thought, "Yep, you're the one." But I still took out 3 pots, lined them up, brought the tree down from the podium, put it into the workshop, and then sort of visualised it with these pots in front of it. And I went, "Yeah, that's the one. That's how it's got to be." And then I did the measurements, realised that this pot's about 8 to 10 centimetres wider, and in equal proportion width-wise as well. Got the tape measure out on the Nabari, measured it, and went, "Yeah, look, if I turn that round now, that would give me everything I want in this pot. Plus, I get to repot a tree that was probably on the cusp of needing it anyway. And as we sort of head towards summer, this one could be hot and dry for us this year. I'm hoping that it's not, but the predictions are it's going to be hot and dry, and I thought, you're better off to repot now, so when summer does get here, the watering is going to be a lot easier. There'll be lots of new roots there. That the tree won't be sort of choked in the pot. So anyway, I took this tree out, and it was pretty hard, the root ball. It probably should have been done anyway. Should have been repotted anyway. So it was sort of a bit of a kick in the bum to myself to say, "Hey, look, you've got to." Don't push them too hard. You'll know that there's an impact if you leave it too long. So I set it up, put it in this pot, changed the front slightly, but also changed the angle of the tree. So lent it back a little bit against the directional movement of the tree to sort of exaggerate the base movement of the tree. So, I don't like straight, I don't like vertical, I don't like horizontal. And when I looked at it critically, I could look at the lower trunk portion of the tree and go, "You know what? If I didn't love this tree so much and I was a bit more independent and I could step back a little bit, I'd probably say that lower trunk part there is probably a bit too vertical, a bit too straight." So then I tilted it back, took my time, got the angle right, and strapped it in, and it looks magnificent. It looks seriously like a different tree. It just absolutely popped. My wife came down, had a look, and I said, "Have a look at this." She goes, "Oh my God, that's a show winner. Where's that one been?" I said, "That's the tree that's about 10 metres out there on that podium." But it's always looked different because it was in a different pot, had a different front, and now it just, I don't know, all the stars have aligned, and it just looks really good. So that was the point of this section of the podcast. When you think you're finished, you're not. And the next part is that I've talked about it before. When you're tired, you've got to stop. That's a common thing for me, is sort of going that one tree too far with the repotting. When you've got an agenda, you've got a list you've got to try and get through. That's when things start to go wrong, and maybe you cut corners. So I'm a big advocate that, especially with bonsai, because it's not a competition. There's no time frame. There's no end point. There's no rush. When you get tired with doing any of this stuff, just make sure you grab 5 and catch your breath and then get back into it, because you'll work a lot more efficiently and you'll be a lot more accurate, and the tree will thank you for it in the long run. Another one I've had to make sure of this year is make sure you've got a good supply of Panadol and Nurofen. So for those people that maybe don't know what they are around the world, it's just painkillers. I've found that this year I've been getting really sore hands because I've been working on some bloody big trees, and the root balls seem to be getting harder and harder. And as these fine roots start to develop that we push for, they sort of accumulate over time, and it can turn into a real solid brick. So having some regular dose of Panadol and Nurofen has certainly helped me get through to the finish line of this repotting season for 2023. I've also learnt that starting with the biggest trees, or the most challenging trees first, is the way to go. Another story, I was at customers not too long ago, and there was a queue of trees. I think it was about eight trees, and they're all good size. They're all really good size, and we talked about it and sort of strategized and said, okay, well, how long have we got? What have we got to do? How long how many do you think you'll get done in that time? And it was like, okay, well, let's pick the biggest and most difficult one first and just get that out of the way. It's going to take the longest, obviously. So, if we're under pressure towards the end, we're going to make compromises and it's not going to be done to the level that it should. So, knocking those awkward, the horrible ones, do the nasty ones first. When they're done, it becomes a lot easier towards the end. And I talked about being tired. As you do get more tired, the workload should get easier, not harder. So I had this enormous English elm to get done, and it was in a pot that's massive. And it's one of those things that you can use multiple people to lift and help carry trees and stuff like that, but it can get bloody awkward, really, really awkward trying to get in that close and lifting trees out of pots off the ground to get them onto benches or whatever. And this thing had a root ball that would have been, I don't know, maybe went down probably 45 centimetres, 50 centimetres, half a metre. And it was just huge. It was just massive and really, really bloody heavy. It's nice once you've worked the roots apart and it becomes a lot lighter and a lot easier to reposition back in that pot. But that initial burst, make sure that you're not too tired when you you start repotting these things, because I tell you, it's going to be a long day if that's the case. Make sure you get a good night's sleep before you have to repot a bucket load of enormous trees. So, and you've got to be organised. It's another thing that I learnt. I'm highly system orientated for a lot of stuff that I do, and I like to have a real regime and process when I go through and I repot. It's one of those things that I've got to have my stations set up. I've got to have my tools organised. You don't want to be. I find it's very. It becomes uncomfortable for me when I'm chopping and changing things fast, like at a really rapid rate, and I can't find things and I'm going round and round in circles and I find that if I've got my station set up and I'm organised, then I'm going to get through it a lot easier and a lot quicker than what I normally would. I found that this time I've really spent a lot more time, as I was just talking about with the black pine, focusing on the angle changes and the front positioning for trees, not just my trees, but every single tree that I work on and I've repotted. I found that I've taken that extra minute, probably is a bit less sometimes, and sometimes it's a bit more. But if you just stop when you've got the pot prepped, you've got the bonsai out of the pot, you've worked the root ball, you've got it in the new pot, and you're ready to start tying it in and finalising adding soil and working the soil into the root ball. I find that pause, however long it is, just that pause to stop and look at the tree from eye level and think about, could things be changed? Could it be a little bit better than what it is now? Maybe it can't. Like I'm not saying everything has to change every single time that you repot, but it's the right thing to do to stop and look at it, because the window between repotting it can be quite long. Even if it's a year, it's still a year looking at the tree thinking, that could have been better. I like to have done a lot of research with my own trees prior to repotting to know what I'm going to be doing. But even still, when I come across a tree for possibly the first time or the first time in a long time, having seen it and looking at it from that set of eyes and looking, going, could a 5-degree tilt on this thing to one side and then just maybe a shuffling in the pot to one side, the opposite side, and then, sure, there's going to be work that has to be done with it. Talked about the changes of angle and what you need to do down the track, but I think that pause, it's really been something that I've focused a lot on this year, just to make sure, can it be better? Can things improve a little bit more? And part of the repotting process is that thought process that goes into it. It's one of the building blocks that we can use to make our trees the best they possibly can. Subtle little changes make such a massive difference. Someone was in the workshop who more than likely is going to be listening to this, and they had this beautiful tree they've worked on for a lot of years, and their idea was, now that Nabari is really developed, they wanted to lift it up a little bit, not create a mound of soil where the soil runs off, still have a flat soil base, but expose that Nabari just a little bit more. And what that did, it actually broadened the Nabari, obviously, because the Nabari spreads out to the side. So the deeper you bury it, the closer it comes to the trunk. So the more that you raise it up, the wider the Nabari comes. And it was actually really quite a massive change, just going up, maybe 5 to 10 mil higher in the pot than the Nabari. The width that it gave it and the claw effect of the Nabari became quite significant, and it worked beautifully. And it's little things like that this repotting season have really made massive differences and really meant a lot to get it right. So, not rushing to the end point, not panicking, not taking 15 hours to repot a tree is really important too, because you'll start doing damage to the roots that are exposed. But you can be thorough and accurate with what you do and timely with it. But just it's those little changes that I think that are going to make a massive difference to your enjoyability and also the future direction of the tree. Like I said, don't have to make the changes, don't have to make a tilt every time that you work the tree, but just consider it, and take that pause when you're repotting just to check it out and see what happens. Now, if you've done bonsai for any period of time, you'll know that watering's pretty important, right? Without the water, the trees are no good. They won't survive. And one of the things that I like to do during the off-season for watering, so during the winter period, is to review my watering system and have a look at it and make sure what I've got to update and blah, blah, blah. Talked about it before. But it always comes down to the weakest link. All right, so the weakest link that you've got in your system is invariably going to be your downfall. And it happened to me recently, where it's not the end of the world, nothing disastrous, but it definitely was a wake-up call for me to look a little bit further than what I had. So I'd been around, checked the systems, looked at the supply, looked at the nozzles, checked everything out, the spray radius, the trees all being covered, blah, 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 it's all good. So I start signing things off going, yep, that's all good. It's all working well, all working the way it should be. Nothing really needs to be changed too drastically. A few little odds and sods, a few little amendments here and there, but nothing major. And then it came to a point where I had to recently, like in the last week, 2 weeks, use the automated watering system every now and then. And I would run it because I was busy. I was away from home when I needed to water the trees, so I needed to use the system. And I would be assuming everything was running okay. I'd get home late in the day and I'd do a quick whip around the trees and go, yep, no, everything looks good. That's fine. Yep, it's all good. Anyway, so there's one area that I've got where I've got redundancy, so I've got multiple lines covering the one area, thank God. But the main area the main line that sort of sprays is called my fence line spray. So it sits on top of like a fence railing, if you like, and it sprays out like a shotgun approach to watering. It sort of covers a large area from a height, and it covers things quite well. And there was one particular tree, a Melaleuca, Australian native, sitting there, and I'd been out there and I'd noticed that there was that, and there was also another Australian native, a Callistemon, just near it as well. And I'd noticed just a few little needles had fallen off this Melaleuca, because it's not the sort. There's different varieties that some they'll sort of droop a little bit with the foliage, and others they just start to drop needles when they get dry. And this thing, I noticed a few needles on the bench, like not a lot. It was probably maybe half a dozen or a dozen. I went, oh well, it's just changing season. That's okay. Everything looks good. Keep going. And I walked down a bit further and I noticed the Callistemon had dropped a few leaves as well. And I went, oh well, that's normal. It's okay. It's the end of the season, end of winter. Everything's getting ready to grow again. That's okay. And I didn't pay too much attention to it, to be honest, because my thoughts were elsewhere. And so I kept out the next day again. I had to use the automated system, come home, do the quick whip around. A few more needles sitting out there. I went, that's actually a couple. I hope the tree's all right. And I had a look at it and went, no, maybe there's still plenty of needles on this thing. It still looks good. Callistemon dropped a few more leaves as well, but it wasn't alarm bells at this stage. Third day go out and I'm out repotting and run the system again, And I thought, I'm going to actually have a bit of a closer look when I get home at what's going on there because something's not right. And get out there and there's a bucket load of needles, a lot. And I went, oh my God, this thing. And I looked at the Clisterman and there's a few extra leaves on there too. That wasn't anywhere near as bad, but it definitely dropped more leaves. And I went, what the hell's going on? And around it I had junipers and some spruce that, don't show lack of watering like these natives do. And I went, oh, what the hell's happening? And suddenly I start tracing back and go, okay, I'll check the watering system. The drippers, are they working? Yeah, they're there. They seem to be okay. All right, let's look along the fence line. And I went, oh, my God. The fence line had started to fail. And by fail, what I mean was the cable ties holding the pipe on this ridge had started to snap. Because when I thought back, they'd been installed, it's over 10 years now, that those cable ties had been put in. And wear and tear, age, whatever, deterioration, they'd started to snap. And when I looked along this fence line, because it's not like something that's easy to see. Like you've got to really, really look closely. And over this, since I'd done the review of the watering system and checked it all off, the cable ties had started to snap. And when I looked along that whole fence line, the pipe was drooping down. So where the spray was coming out was actually well below where the pots were based and the trees were based. So therefore, even though the system's running, I'm checking my phone and checking the system itself, and it says, yes, I'm watering, no worries at all. Getting to the cameras, I can see water spraying everywhere. It's like, yep, that's cool, it's working. It wasn't actually doing the job. It was spraying below the pots, and therefore these natives, these trees had missed out because of something stupid like cable ties starting to deteriorate and snap. And so then when I thought back and went, okay, well, every other line that's using cable ties now I need to go and check. And bugger me, seriously, almost every single one of these things had snapped along this line, and there was other sections of my watering system too that had started to droop and fail, and they were missing. But thank God for this redundancy that it had helped. But it's just these two natives that had given me the telltale signs and alerted me to it. And I'm a week and a half, sort of 2 weeks beyond where this situation occurred, and I can proudly report that the tree's looking good. There's new buds starting to appear on the branches for this Melaleuca. No more needle drop. The Clisterman's looking good too. There's lots of nice new shoots on that too. So I'm just keeping an eye on it. It reiterates to me that why I love hand watering as opposed to using an automated system. But the automated system that you've got has to be thorough. And it has to be tested. It has to be checked all the time, because something stupid like a cable tie, I could have, if I'd let this thing go on too much further, then, it could have been disastrous. Or if it was in the heat of summer, that's the part that really shocked me was if this had happened when it's like 40 odd degrees, one day missing watering when I'm doing it 3, 4, 5 times, whatever it is, if I'm away from the trees, and I think that everything's working fine and it's not, then that could have been disastrous on many fronts. And it always comes back to the weakest link. It just resonates with me all the time that you can have a big robust system, you can have a great controller, you can have the best wiring that you've got, but it all comes down to a single thing like a cable tie that can be your downfall. It can be one of your drippers, the plastic that's used in it, maybe it's a 10-cent dripper as opposed to a $2 dripper, and the plastic deteriorates and takes a slight knock and then cracks off, and then the dripper doesn't work anymore. Something like that. It's always the thing that you think isn't going to happen when it comes to watering our trees that just reminds me that we've got to be so vigilant with it. And as I said before, the predictions are we're going to have some warmer extremes. It's going to get more extreme with the heat and more extreme with the cold over time, apparently. And that's something that to be honest, terrifies me. And planning for it now. I was talking yesterday with a fellow in the workshop, and we talked a lot about shade cloth structures and the movability of those things and being able to put them up and down as quickly as you possibly can, and post the workshop talking about that, it's made me think about it and go, maybe it's something that I need to look at extending. Maybe there's areas of the yard where I need to, where I haven't had shade cloth in the past. Maybe it's something that I need to consider doing as well, and reviewing that side of my garden as we get towards these more extreme temperatures. And like I said, something like a very cheap cable tie can have a disastrous impact. So I've been through the system. I've renewed and refreshed the cable ties, and I've also put in some aluminium wire ties on there as well, using some bonsai wire that is definitely going to outlast time. So even if these cable ties in another 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever, start to fail, then I've got some kind of a backup system there to at least alert me or keep things on the path that they should be, to ensuring that I'm not going to have to go through all that again. We are literally hours away from spring hitting our doors. It's a good time. If you've seen anything I've put up on the socials lately, there was some beautiful blossoms from some prunus I've got in my yard, and every single photo I uploaded was from a different tree, and I love it. It's the indicator that things are about to get warmer and that growth's about to spurt out. So the other day when I was planning for this podcast, I thought, well, I love that it's seasonal. I love that it's relevant to a lot of people that listen to the podcast about what we have to do at this particular time of the year. And it's a nice little prompt, a reminder. And so part of it was, I thought, well, we got spring. So spring means growth. It means obviously fertilizing, which I'll talk about a bit later in future podcasts. But it's a one-off deal. This first burst we get from spring is so important in how we manage the growth, that your plans that you put in place can either be achieved or set back based on what you do with your scissors in this initial burst that we get. And things can be destroyed. Your ramification on a highly ramified tree, your development that you've put into it over the years can be destroyed by not pruning. So it's something that you need to be mindful of what to do to harness this burst that we get when things wake up, especially if they've been repotted. You would have found by now that a lot of the trees get stimulated by repotting, and that burst of growth comes a little bit quicker than those that maybe haven't been repotted, even though they're the same species that sit on the same bench and do the same thing year on year. They can have a bit of an early kick. So really this section of the podcast is to remind everybody to cut or not to cut. That's the question you've got to face when it comes to spring. And it can seem like a really easy thing to knock off and say, yep, no worries. And if your mindset is constantly around silhouette or perfection or beauty, as opposed to planning future, what's going to happen with this thing in 100 years' time, then your mindset and your actual activity with your scissors and your branch cutters or your pruning process is going to be very, very different. I can't say that I'm perfect at it, but if my advice to you is, if you go to look at every single tree in this, once this spring burst sort of happens in the next week or so, if you have got your scissors in your hand and you think plan as opposed to beauty, then I think you'll be in a far better place in a year's time or 2 years' time or even 6 months' time with your tree. Harnessing this burst of growth can really take things leaps and bounds ahead. I've been talking a lot lately with people about, the tick box strategy you've got to have with developing your trees, going back to really basic fundamentals. It's trunk and nabari first. When that's done, tick, move on to the next box, which is your primary branches. When your primary branches are set, tick, move on to secondary branches. Secondary branches are set, tick, move on to your ramification. Now, there can be some grey areas in between that, but the basic fundamental is that you cannot be working on your ramification, or you shouldn't be, while you're still trying to get your trunk thickness right, because you need things to grow and to extend, to get thicker, which then allows you to develop your trunk. So when you're out there with your scissors and you're thinking, I'd really like a nice silhouette on this maple, I'd really like it to be looking like a perfect little tree, just go through that checkbox in your mind. Is the trunk and the barry done? Yep, cool. Primary branches done? No, they're not. Well, okay, so how do you develop your primary branches? You keep in mind that your lower branches have got to be or should be thicker than your upper branches. So if that's not the case, if your lower branches are thinner than your upper branches, then let some buds extend, because the longer they get, the thicker that branch is going to become. And that will also help with the point that branch comes into contact with the main trunk and down will get thicker as a result of that sacrifice branch. So I'm not saying that you need to maybe run a sacrifice for 3, 4, 5 years, although you can. I'm just saying that this initial burst of spring, it might be worthwhile looking at your trees going, okay, well, I'm going to prune the apex because I don't want the apex getting too thick, and that's where all the resources are going to go to. So you prune that section of the tree and leave the lower sections that are thinner, possibly a little bit weaker, maybe a bit underdeveloped. Let them push out and extend. It's the monk's head. It's got the clean-cut sort of top on it. The apex looks really nice and trim and taut. The bottom looks long and shaggy. That's probably 50% of my collection. That's almost every single tree that's in development has got that look and feel to it with this initial burst of spring. I'm always busy trying to push resources from strong areas to weaker areas, trying to get that set of scales to balance out by pruning the strong areas and allowing those resources then to flow down to the weaker areas, and then they start to push and elongate. They suddenly get stronger, and by pruning something, you're stopping it from growing, right? So you're stopping it from getting resources. You're stopping it from getting stronger. And that's exactly what you want to do in the strong areas. You want it to stop getting stronger and push down to those weaker areas. Anything that's, for bonsai, it's always, not always, in the vast majority of circumstances, all the strength is going to go to the apex of the tree. And that's not always what we want. This is where come back to episode 1 this year. I talked about having a plan in place, and I still think that's the most important thing that you can do with your bonsai, is having that plan and being very clear and succinct on exactly what you want to achieve and sticking to the plan. Stick to it. You might have a sacrifice branch at the apex, which is going to give you overall thickening of the trunk. That's cool. With that in mind, allow that one to run, and then maybe prune some of the others back. We can use our pruning to allocate resources. We can tell the tree where we want the tree to push its resources by not pruning those areas. All right. This is all stuff that you need to have in your back pocket when you are walking around your collection, or you've got a tree on the bench in front of you. Understand that when you prune something, you're stopping resources going to that area. By not pruning it, you're pushing resources to that area. So if you've got a weak area, this is when we talk about needle plucking on trees and needle density more particular. You have a weaker area, you want a higher needle density in those areas than a strong area, which has a lesser needle density, because where there's more needles, there's more resources, right? So, you might come to spring candle pinching on your pines. That's a process that needs to be managed as well, because where you're pinching, you're saying, okay, no more resources, go and find another bud to run. Go and find something else to achieve your objective of growing strong and getting as much sun as you possibly can. So, in the weaker areas on your pines, you're not going to be doing the candle breaking in those areas, because you want the resources there, right? You want the tree to go, hey, you know what? You're actually you're going to give me what I need. You're going to allow me to get as much sunlight as I possibly can, because you're the chosen one. You're the one that's going to elongate. You're the one that's going to extend. You're going to give me lots of sunshine. You're going to make me really strong. So you know what? Here you go. Here's some more resources for you. And in the strong areas, naturally on your pines or the apex, you're going, hey, there's a candle popping up, break it off. Another one coming up, break it off. Another one coming up, break it off. And then the tree starts pushing resources down, and this gives us our balance. It's everything that we want with bonsai is about balance. We want the strong and the weak areas to be exactly the same. So when you look at the tree, you've got that overall feeling of significant health and consistency with everything. Everything grows the same way with the trees. And spring pruning, that's when we can really make a massive difference to it. And to cut or not to cut, it's the basic question and approach that you need to ask yourself every single time you're making cuts. And I'm not trying to make it that you sit and look at a tree for 3.5 days going, should I cut this one? Shouldn't I cut it? Yes. Should I cut this one? Shouldn't I cut it? Yes. It's about getting back to that plan, saying, okay, do I want this area stronger? Do I want this area thicker? Do I want this area longer? Do I want more development in this area? Okay, cool. If that's the case, then it errs to the side of, okay, well, I don't prune, but which parts don't I prune? That's when you start refining down, going, okay, well, this one, and this one don't get pruned, but all the rest, they're going to get pruned. All right, so this part of the tree, is it too strong at the moment? Yes, it is. All right, well, that means you've got to cut it. As soon as you see those buds starting to push out and starting to grow, you've got to get in there with your scissors and start making work. And I know it's hard. I know we've all got time constraints. We've all got lives to live, all got things to do. But if you've got a tree that's really at the pointy end, and I'm thinking in my head about like Japanese maples especially, if you've got a tree that's really at that high end of refinement, and it's ticking a lot of boxes for you being close to perfection, you can't wait till that thing's extended, it shoots out, because you're going to have long internodes, you're going to have thick, coarse growth, because the longer those shoots get, the thicker the base has to become as well. So even when you cut it back, you're going to have really thick, coarse growth, and you can pretty much undo a lot of years' hard work in a very, very short period of time. So some of my maples, as they're opening now, as they're starting to push their growth, almost every day I'm out there with my tweezers and I'm pinching out the tips of the new growth while they're still minuscule, while they're only 3, 4, 5 mil long. I'm getting in there with my tweezers and I'm removing that growth, because my plan with it is to keep it highly ramified. I know that the trees are balanced. I know that the strength from the top area of the tree to the bottom area of the tree is very, very consistent. So I can go into the planning phase for that one and say, okay, this one is in this stage where I am just going to be pinching this thing all over. Other maples I've got, it's, okay, this whole branch here needs to develop more. So I pinch the rest of the tree consistently, but this section that I'm trying to develop the branch on, I let that extend. I've got sacrifice branches. I'm wanting to thicken that up a little bit. I want more resources in that area because it's a little too weak. So I let them grow. The other areas maybe to 2-3 pairs of leaves, and then it's going to get cut back to that first pair when it's time to do that work. So make sure you've got your plan enacted. Don't just get in there and cut everything because it's pushing out. Let your trees be trees for a little bit. Let them push the growth, get some new roots happening, then make cuts back. But just most of all, stick with the plan. Whatever the plan is you've got for the tree, and if you haven't got one, it's a great time right now to sit there and actually think about it before that burst of growth comes. Once you make that first cut, things aren't quite as aggressive from here on out. We do get extra growth, of course, but it's nowhere near as aggressive and pleasant as that first burst of spring growth that we get. You may have heard me talk about subscribers to the podcast and putting it out there that that's an option for supporters to do. I just want to say now, thank you very much to the subscribers that have come on board and signed up. I love it. Honestly, it makes me really, really, really happy and proud of what I put together, that it's supported in such a way. And to the subscribers that have come on board, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. It really means a lot. The podcast does take a lot of work. So if you are thinking of becoming a subscriber, please do. I know it's tough times at the moment, and I don't expect it, but it does go a long way to keeping this podcast ticking on. So again, thank you to everybody that's jumping on board. Well, that's us for another podcast. The last podcast release before I say goodbye to winter, and I can tell you I'm glad it's gone. It's been long, it's been cold, it's been bloody hard work. This repotting this year, there's been lots of trees done. I've actually lost count. It's got to be. I was having a beer the other night, and I was doing a quick maths in my head about my own trees, and they got up quite high, and then I started thinking, okay, we've been to this customer, you've done that many on that day, and then you did this and you did that and whatever, and it's in the hundreds. I reckon it's 200 to 300 range at least of trees that have been done in a relatively short period of time, and that's it for the exotics as far as I'm concerned. In the next few days, should wrap up before we get into September when spring comes. That's it for me, done. And then I look forward to repotting our natives and more tropical species get done a few months down the track. So I've got a bit of a break and then get back to it again in another fashion. But yeah, I am glad that winter's coming to an end. And I do love, I walked around the yard this morning having my coffee before I start recording this podcast, and the smell of the blossoms around the yard. Some of the trees, I've got the garden trees around the place too, are flowering, and it's just beautiful. It's a good time to be involved with your bonsai. I think it's so rewarding at the moment that spring just brings that new burst, that renewal, that rejuvenation that just continually puts a smile on my dial. I love it. So if you get the chance, make sure you get to draw a few deep breaths around your bonsai now, because they're really on show. Every single part of what they do, just every year, blows my mind. The miracle of that rejuvenation, that growth that they do, it never ceases to amaze me and to inspire me. I walk through black pines. I've got a lot of black pines, and I see them every year. But when you start seeing those little white candles start to push it, it just sends a shiver up my spine. It just makes me really, really happy. So I do love this time of year, and I'm really looking forward to what spring brings. And thank you for listening to the podcast. Thanks for sticking around. As always, I do say it every time, but please reach out if there's anything I can do for you via the socials. Is the easiest way, Instagram or Facebook, and I will endeavour to always stay in touch and help wherever I can, because what's good for bonsai is good for all of us, and if we can extend that olive branch to anyone in bonsai, then we definitely should. We should be a community that is bonded tightly based on our love for these tiny little trees, and there's lots of love to go around. So I feel it all the time from the messages I get and the support that comes from every single corner of the globe. You wouldn't believe it, honestly. The reach out that happens is really great, and it's really appreciated, and thank you very much. So as always, give them a cuddle for me, and until next time, happy bonsai.